Well, hi there guys. First time doing anything like this for a little while. I still haven't got around to doing some other stuff. I do apologise. All the other things I've managed to get on is some of the finished. I've been trying to show some of the finished knives, if anybody's seen that. Like I said, the main reason is obviously I'm starting to sell some of the things I have, so any surplus stuff that I'm making that I haven't got, that aren't on commission, I'm selling. And I just think this just gives it an avenue for people to have a better view of what it is and what the options are if it's not quite right. So that's that side of things. However, I've been a bit full on, a bit busy, but also personal stuff. But I've had blood pressure's been a bit of a problem just last couple of months, well, up to fairly recently, and hadn't realised, just left me feeling pretty tired and lethargic. So just doing the normal day-to-day stuff, it's just been enough for me. I haven't been able to face anything else. Hopefully that's something like back under control, and I'm getting a little bit back up to speed now, getting my fitness back and doing things. Now once I found out what the problem was. So anyway, yeah, so, but the rationale for this one is I did have a question about my stabilising things that I use, and I'm stabilising my timbers. So what I'll do is I'll just show you what I've put together, and it is a bit of a Heath Robinson thing, but it's all there, it works, it does the job properly. Because I am aware you can spend an awful lot of money on the stuff that's purpose built for this, but I watched quite a few of the videos of what people had and what they did and how it worked, and basically put it together from there. Now obviously the first thing you're going to need is a pump. These are not bloody light. Now you can't do this with the sort of like the hand vacuum pumps that you'll see. You often get them in like the car spares and things like that for, I think it's used for pulling brake fluid and things like that through. They will not give you a strong enough vacuum or hold that vacuum. So unfortunately, now this is the cheapest one I could get over here. From what I got this picked up, it's in Auckland. Good service, good, you know, very good. But this was about I think the 500 and something I was looking this morning. This was about $480, I think, 18 months ago, something like that. This was the cheapest model. But for what I'm doing, that's absolutely fine. It's the smallest one you can get. I believe it's a something vane, not a twin vane, dual vane vacuum pump or something like this. You cannot do that without something like this. Now you might be able to pick something up on Trade Me, or if you know anywhere. The one thing I will say is these are on for a long time. And even commercially, they run these for a long time, putting vacuums on things. So it's going to get a lot of use. So just be careful if you do buy one, because if you don't use them correctly, which I'll talk about in a minute, you know, they can knacker up, and then, you know, the bloody lot of money to fix. So if you are lucky and you drop on one that you know is in great stuff. If not, be prepared to pay a bit of money for something like this. But if you're wanting to do your own stabilising, which gives you that freedom of doing whatever you want and practicing and playing with different things, then it's the only way of doing it. Now, the next thing I got was probably, well, actually the jars. I believe this one, was it this one? I think it was this one anyway. And I got it in a sale at the warehouse, and it was about $8 or something like that, down from God knows whatever. That was the first one I bought. Now, I'll get back here. As you can see, it's pretty large. I got it and thought, oh, that'll do the job. It takes a bloody lot of wood to fill that, and a lot of resin. Get to that in a minute. But, you know, I did that initially. And then, when I was in an op shop, I spotted this. And I thought, oh, fingers crossed. So I brought it back and made a smaller lid for it and things like that. Started on that. Well, I actually just altered the one I'll show you in a minute. And then just by pure fluke, when I was storing things away, I went to put it back into my big jar. Here. And so just I could store things up on my shelf. And I thought, oh, that sits underneath the lip. So what I did was, because the valve is offset on the lid that I've made, I'm able to put these together like this, and then the valve sits up here. So if there is any splash or foam, it hits the top, but I'm keeping it away from where the suction is going in to prevent it from being sucked into my pump. So it worked. And I'd say that, I think I paid $2 at the op shop, something like that. You might even have a granny or a friend, or I don't know if this is a sweet jar, I think, or a cookie jar, and this was a pasta. But those two work together, so even the pair of them together cost me $10. Now you'll also need, anybody who makes knives, it won't be a problem, but you will need something to weigh the wood down with. This is just old offcuts of metal I used for when I was doing heat treating practice and things like that. You'd be surprised it takes quite a bit of weight to hold the wood down when you first put it into, well, when you put it into the resin full stop, because it's full of air. So you'll need that. Then came the lid. Now, what I have here, whoops, throwing my things at me. What I have here is a piece of 10mm Perspex. Dropped lucky. Actually, I was just talking about trying to find some thick plastic for the top at Mate's Barbie, and somebody said, "Oh, hang on a minute, I might be able to help you there." And he'd been, I don't know what he'd been making, but he just had an old offcut, and I just cut it into a circle. Pretty much, I suppose, I don't know how thick it is. There's a fair bit of pressure goes on in here, guys, you know, and so it's something that's going to risk, you know, if it's on the top, it's going to sort of like pull the centre down a bit if it's not strong enough. Whether you need to go to this ilk, I don't know. You might be able to get away with 2 or 3 bits of thicker plastic and araldite them together, something like that. But that gave me the lid. The seal is actually just a foam door seal from, I think, Bunnings or somewhere like that, you know, for draft excluding. And I thought, well, I'll give it a try, a couple of dollars, and I've actually got, this is the original one I've put on, still using the same one. I've got enough in there to replace it another couple of times over. I just put it onto the top, drew around the jar, and then fitted that in, and a little bit of tweaking, and then just make sure that that sits really nice and flat, right in the middle of the seal, around the top of the jar. When you do your jar, just make sure you've got no sharp edges on it, just a tip there. So that just sits on there. Then, I believe it was somewhere like Repco, I think. Oh no, I got the gauge from, that just come off Trade Me. I think it was about $12 off Trade Me, and it's a car thing for checking pressure and compression. I think it is, or something like that. Anyway, and then Repco, I got basically, I think it's just off of a compressor. So obviously, it's the pipe is strong enough. It's not going to crush flat. You can't just use like a silicon type pipe, or you know, like a, I don't know, just a thin piece of pipe, because the compression, once this gets up to full pressure, will just flatten it. But it wasn't expensive. I mean, I've got enough to replace this about 3 times. Little adapter there allowed me to just, because obviously I've got one pipe going into the jar, which sucks the air out, and then the other one goes into the back of the gauge, which tells me what the pressure is. Couple of connectors. Excuse me while I pick the other one up. Oh, right. And basically what it came with was 2 of these, a little bayonet fitting with a screw thread. That's one I've got onto here. Now the one thing with this is, bear in mind, this is a compression. It's not a compressor. It's not blowing anything out. So this didn't fit properly. So I just built it up with tape, screwed it on, so it was a tight fit. And then what happens is, as long as you haven't got any air leak, when you turn it on, it pulls everything together, so it's not blowing it apart like you would if you were using a compressor and you were blowing things. But luckily this one fitted directly onto the little connector I got with the cable. This actually came fitted for whatever it is it goes into. I put this little bayonet fitting on, and then basically what happens is that just pushes into here. It does. There we go. So that just pushes in. So that's the same as on here. So basically, when the lid's on square, I can put this on. That goes into here, sits there. Everything is turned on, and your compression builds up. Now, when you first start to get the compression on, and you first start to do it, you'll find you get loads and loads and loads and loads of bubbles. And all I do is, because I don't have one of the little, you know, you can get them where you can get little fancy valves here to turn the air on and off. I couldn't find one of them. Or I found one, and it was stupid money. But all I do is I just very carefully just lift the lock off a little bit, and just you can just let the air out. It'll just bleed the air. Let the bubbles drop, start again. It only takes a minute or 2 and things will settle down. But it's just bear in mind, so it's not you don't have to sat there for the whole umpteen hours. You know, you only have to probably release the pressure maybe 2 or 3 times, and then you'll find it all settles down. But what you've got to remember is, when you've decided you've finished and there's no more air coming out, is don't just turn your vac off, because it damages the vanes. What you do is you've got to release the pressure. So you release the pressure, take this off, then turn your vac off. Now that's where this second one comes in handy, because often you won't have got all the vacuum out of your pump, so you don't want to start pulling things apart. So by having a spare one of these, by clipping it into here, it holds the valve open, lets the rest of the air out. So just a couple of little tips there on using it. Don't forget your vacuum oil. You'll probably get a little bit with it, but you need vacuum oil. I did a lot of reading about this, and you always got the guys who go, "Oh, I don't mind, I just put any compressor oil in, I do this, I do that." The stuff I read, and not from the manufacturers, but from the people who use these things, use these machines a lot, was you will extend the life and get a better vacuum and a cleaner machine if you use proper vacuum oil, not compressor oil. It's a bit dear, but you use very little. Now mine's got a window at the back here, and what you've got to do is you top it up when the machine's running, not when it's off. So you need it to the fill level, so you turn the machine on, check your level, and if it's a bit low, that's when you top it up. Don't do it when it's off, because it all sinks into the bottom and your level looks high anyway. So that means when it's running, it ends up low. So you top it up when the machine's running. It's all in the instructions, but if you're anything like me, you don't always read them. So, yep, so like I say, proper vacuum oil. Now, as to the resin I use cactus juice. I don't have any left at the minute, that's why I can't do you a little display of something going on. I do apologise, although I'm sure I've done that before in previous vids. But I use cactus juice. Now again, I've read around and lots of people have tried lots of different things. The one thing I do find is that it's agreed, full stop, that at the moment, I'm going back about 18 months when I first started doing this, probably 18 months ago, maybe a bit more, when I first started doing this. There was really only cactus juice that they highly recommended. You can get away with other stuff, I believe, and other things will work, but that's the one they recommend. And basically you put your blocks in, cover them with, I put a good inch over the top, and then, run your pump until you have no air coming out, things like that. But that's why I just use the cactus juice. I buy it, I'm not endorsed, I've said this before, everything I've got I've bought, I don't have anything given, I'm not doing any advertising for anybody. It's what I've got, it's what I use, and the cactus juice works. So that's basically that's the kit I put together. So apart from the pump, it literally probably cost me apart from the pump, 12, I think the pipes 20, 35, maybe $50 for all the other bits together. Probably cost me about $50, maybe a little bit more. So yeah, and it works. So if you have the money to go out and get the pre-made setup, it's wonderful. I'm sure. I'd love it, but I didn't have another $400 or $500 to pay for the fancy setup. The one thing they do say is just be careful you don't give your jars a good knock when you've got the vacuum in there, because there's a lot of pressure pulling in, they can shatter. I've had absolutely no problems. With this setup that I've got here as well, with having the two sets of jars, if something knocked the outer jar and it broke, it wouldn't affect anything on the inside. I wouldn't be losing the cactus juice or anything else on the inside, because that's a separate jar, and obviously that's got equal pressure inside and out as the jar on the inside, so that should be a bit safer. So other than that, the only other thing I will say is when you have stabilised some timbers, I've seen and I've read quite a bit about how they talk about it's almost like it's the panacea to a completely inert, stable material that still looks like wood. It's not. If you Google it and put on Googling about stabilised timbers and warpage, you will find stabilised timbers will still move. Just a much smaller amount than unstabilised timbers. And at the end of the day, don't forget, at the end of the day, people have been making knife handles out of wood for thousands of years, so it's not the all and end all. What the beauty of stabilised timbers for me is it allows me to use woods which would otherwise be too soft. So I don't stabilise good hard timbers. So if I've got some good timbers, I just get them really dry in the cabinet. I've shown you before. So things like Puriri, good Pahutakawa, Manuka, Karnika, Black Mare, anything like that, they're already good, hard, solid timbers. And all I do is I finish them normally. I finish those with a good soak in the linseed oil and white spirit preparation I use, and then spend a couple of days reapplying, it's left and polished and things like that. But what I do now is even my stabilised timbers go through a very similar process. So once the handle's done and finished, I'll give it a really good rub with the linseed oil prep and wire wool, very fine wire wool. I'll leave it for 24 hours. I do it again. I'll leave it for 24 hours and I do it again. I then leave it for 2 or 3 days, and then I go to the buffing. Then I'll buff up and clean up. And that's because I made some scales. I've done something similar to this. It was just, they were all cleaned. They were actually thinner than this. They were quite thin scales, which I think made it a bit more. But I'd glued the liners on. Now these are all getting ready to get used. But those, I'd made them up, and then for some reason I didn't use them, I went to something else. And they were just sat around for about 6 weeks, 2 months. And then I thought, I remembered them, so I went to get them out, and they were actually warped. Now, if it had been a thicker piece of wood, the warpage actually was that small. If it had been a thicker piece of wood, and I hadn't already glued the liners on, which I think made it worse, I could have just sanded them flat. So we're not talking a big bow here, we were just talking it was out of shape. But I think because I glued the liners on, what had happened is, when it did move, it obviously moved from this area here. This area didn't move, so it pushed it. So liners will move. So if you do make some and you're not going to use them, put them in plastic bags, just to keep any damp off them. You know, these are only going to be on here for a matter of days, maybe a week or something like that, and it's pretty warm anyway. So just bear it in mind, the timbers can move. Even on a knife, I've had a knife handle, I'd put a knife together, it was sat for a while, and I noticed a bit of movement. And then the movement was that small, you couldn't see it, but you could just feel it with your fingernail. So, you know, it is not the be-all and end-all. It will not turn it will not turn a piece of wood into a piece of plastic that never moves. If people tell you it will, they're pissing up your back. And if you don't believe me, Google it. And you'll find lots of guys who do it, who stabilise professionally, will still say the same thing. It just reduces. So what I do now, if you want to have a little wander this way, this is where I keep all my timbers here. I'm just going to turn the camera. Now, what I do is, it's all done in stages. So my first stage, which is basically down here, these are all newer timbers. They might have already been dried. They're all at different stages, but these have just basically been stored. This layer is a set of timbers. These are all timbers that I probably wouldn't stabilise. So I've got Periri, Pohutukawas, different sorts of Pohutukawa, ironwood, black mare. These are sort of like timbers that I wouldn't, but these have been dried. So I've had these in my drying cabinet. I've got them as dry as possible. The reason I now put them out here is it will just let them settle. So if you get something which is completely bone dry, that wood wants to soak up water. So you take it out your drying cabinet, and even if you seal it with linseed oil and all the rest of it, it's going to draw in some moisture and you're going to get more movement. So that's the reason I have this layer. So these are all ready to use and they've been allowed to settle if you want. Although some of these, I've got some rather nice Pohutukawa here, and it's actually got a bit of spalting in it. So they might end up actually getting baked, and I did a little bit of practicing with a little bit of trial and error. But anyway, these are then other woods that I've actually kept stabilised, and these are, this is where they sit now. So rather than keeping them in the cabinet, once they've been stabilised and keeping them in bags, I put them out here. Now what I've found is, if these have moved, because there's nothing on them, if they've moved, it's that small, and it's consistent across the whole piece of timber. So I've got Rimus, Kauri, Matai, I've got some Portera, Rata, and some very nice lancewood. I think that's going to be very nice. But my rationale for that is, again, I think if you've something to bear in mind with handlewoods, this is getting to be a bit of a long video, but it's the last thing I'll say, is that I think if you get something bone dry like in a drying cabinet, and then you take it out of that environment, well, even soaking it in linseed oil until it polymerises, that's soaking in, that's going to cause a bit of movement itself. So that's the reason I now keep everything I've got dried, and I'm happy that it's dry, I put into the environment in which it's going to live. That will allow it to take on a certain amount of moisture, but once it's done that, it will settle. So it's seasoned, it's hardened, but it's already done its movement, if you want. Then they can be cleaned down and oiled and all the rest of it, and everything hopefully will stay sealed. That's my cunning plan. So with that, I hope that was reasonably interesting. Bit of food for thought. And well, anyway, with that, I will catch you guys on the flip side. And thanks for watching, and see you out there.